Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we now are moving on to our first panel discussion of our second day at the Indonesia Economic Summit 2026. And our first plenary discussion is titled Making Indonesia an Anchor for Global Investments. This session will explore how Indonesia can position itself as a stable anchor for global investment amid growing economic fragmentation. So without further ado, to lead this critical conversation, it is my pleasure to invite our moderator onto the stage, Chief Executive Officer of the Asia Group Advisors, Mr. Adam Schwarz. Please give a round of applause.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our first panel of the day, Making Indonesia an Anchor for Global Investments. We're running a little late today, so we're going to try to catch up. But first, I'd like to introduce our very distinguished panel, and welcome to the stage. First, Mr. Arsjad Rasjid, Chair of the Board of the Indonesian Business Council and the founder of Sriwijaya Capital. Mr. Tadashi Maeda, Chairman of the Board for the Japan Bank of International Cooperation and a former Special Advisor to the Japanese Cabinet. Dato Feisal Zahir, Managing Director of Khazanah Nasional, Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund. And Hazem Ben-Gacem is the founder and CEO of Blue 5 Capital and a former co-CEO of InvestCorp. Thank you all for joining. I'm delighted to be joined by such a distinguished panel, and we've got a very meaty topic to discuss today. Really about sort of looking from mainly a foreign investment point of view about how we're going to drive additional capital and investment in Indonesia. But Arsjad, I'd like to start with you as our co-host this morning. Probably from your perspective, kind of from an inbound investment. What are you seeing as the most compelling opportunities for investment in Indonesia? And what are you looking forward to, or what would you like to see in terms of making that Indonesia's investment proposition even more compelling?
Thank you, Adam. Thank you very much, everyone. And from my perspective, maybe two things. One is opportunities, but also we have to hear what the investors are asking, the questions, Adam. So basically, if you talk about Indonesia, I think it's very clear, Indonesia, we are strategically located. We have a population of more than 280 million people, young demography. I think the interest to come to Indonesia is, in my opinion, are very high. And I think Indonesia can be part of the regional supply chain, as I said. But the more questions that I'm hearing, many from the inbounds coming into Indonesia, is about the question of, number one is a question of regulatory. The question about uncertainty in governance regulations. Those are questions that I think a lot of the investors coming into Indonesia are asking those questions. And also the question of, if we want to invest in Indonesia, the question is, who do we partner with? And then the questions of coming inbound to Indonesia, the questions of how's the capability or human capital in Indonesia? Those are questions that I hear about this inbound investors coming to Indonesia. But in that way, I ask the question, but always at the same time, I want to give an optimistic view about it. This is what Prabowo Subianto, our president, mentioned at the World Economic Forum, which basically he says, he understands and he says he wants to make sure Indonesia is number one, he says about the law, certainty of law. He says that. So actually, our president is aware And he's doing his best to actually make sure that the certainty of law is here in Indonesia. And I think that's one of the foremost questions. And then he also mentioned in the World Economic Forum, he understands also about the needs of capabilities, which is human capital development, technology innovations, and so forth, in order to create a higher productivity of our workforce, and of course, a higher skills, per se. He mentioned that during the World Economic Forum. The third is about capital, and he said, he understands, but he said that we need a lot of capital, a lot of investment to Indonesia. But now Indonesia have Danantara, because he always mentioned about Indonesia Incorporated. When he said about Indonesia Incorporated, the hope he has is that there are two capital, or this is the same two engines, what our finance minister yesterday mentioned. The engine of public and the engine of private. So when it says public, now Indonesia have Danantara. And when we talk about the private, of course, it's not only for domestic investors, but it is also for international investors. So with this capital, I think it's very much, you can say, the opportunity to have thinking about long-term investment in Indonesia. Because previously, maybe the government or the public sectors are not putting money into it, not putting money in their mouth. Now, what the government is saying, we have Danantara. They will co-invest with you. Danantara will co-invest. If Danantara co-invest with you, I have to make sure we are very aligned. Domestic or international investors, we are very aligned. Aligned that, Danantara will make sure that the investment is going to be a sound investment, is of doing business and so forth. So, and yesterday, I think the Minister of Finance also mentioned about debottlenecking. So that's also very important for an inbound investment. So the government is hearing that. So now there is a weekly, if I'm not mistaken, meetings coordinating Minister of Economic Affairs and so forth, to actually look at various companies and go company to company and says, any company who is investing in Indonesia, if you have issues, come to see us. Let me help you, to assist you, to support you for the debottlenecking. So I think these are, there's concerns and it's the facts. But it's also now the government is hearing this and the government is actually stepping up to this. And the question is sometimes time. Why? I mean, just imagine if you go back in time when Pak Joko Widodo became the president of Indonesia, it takes 2 years to have a transition. Now Pak Prabowo just passed October, just 1 year and passing. It's not 2 years yet, per se. I'm not saying to have an excuse, but I hope what we can see from when actually the Indonesian stock exchange fell 8% because of MSCI. The reaction of the government last weekend, they worked on it, did a swift decision of now how to transform the Indonesian stock exchange and particularly the securities. Maybe that's to start with this.
Thank you, Arsjad. That's a very good start. Dr. Feisal, let me turn to you since Arsjad mentioned Danantara, and I know we want to talk about that in this panel. You, of course, heading Malaysia's sovereign wealth funds. How are you, as Arsjad mentioned, sort of, or referring to Pak Prabowo's sort of focus on the law and the capabilities and capital. How do you look at, from your Khazanah experience, what role can a sovereign wealth fund play in catalyzing private sector? And any thoughts you might have? Obviously Danantara is a much younger entity than Khazanah. What do you think it should focus on at this stage of its development?
Thanks, Adam, for that question. I think so the experience in Malaysia and our role as a it's alignment with industrial policies with the country. I think that's very, very clear. Once you have clarity in terms of what the government wants to do, then the Sovereign Wealth Fund can actually be a catalyst to actually enable that. And I'll explain to you what we've done in Malaysia and some of the things, perhaps the similarities of what Arsjad mentioned. So first, the economy of Madani is to raise the ceiling and raise the floor, increasing the economic complexity, while at the same time ensure that it's inclusive. So just on these 2 points, and this is the bit about having that, that partnership, right? So one area, we created a $1.5 billion fund, which is an impact fund, and that's really looking at how we can actually catalyze the whole economy. This is transforming firms, because Khazanah, we can't do it alone. And we focus on certain sectors. So one sector, as an example, is the semiconductor sector. Now, for this, it's a sector that's been there for decades, but it needs to leapfrog to something a bit more than what it is currently. So look at design and advanced packaging. So what we did was we actually have this base camp. We call it a base camp, a semiconductor base camp. And this is where we have a platform where we work very closely with the ministry, we work closely with the private sector, and we ourselves are there, and we have research people as well. It's to really understand the ecosystem around that. And understanding the ecosystem, then we can debottleneck and really unlock some of the pain points that we have in the industry. A lot of domestic players complain that the government are too friendly to foreign investment, but they forget about domestic. And I think in any developing nation, you have to consider the two. You can't just favor the foreign, you have to favor the local as well. And that's a platform that we did. And with that, we managed to bring in capital from outside, we seeded capital from domestic, and we co-invested in them. We had this public and private partnership in order to develop it further. So looking at this, I think that talking about that, how we do it, being aligned to government policy, ensuring that we are kind of like in between the government, private sector, and as well as the people as well. And really try to see what role we can play. And in doing so, what we are focused on is understanding the ecosystem and playing a part where it can actually catalyze the growth. Sorry, one more thing. You mentioned about capacity, right? We're also involved in that. So we do invest in universities that focus on computer science, et cetera, in order to actually build the capability within the country so we have the talent pool to receive that growth.
Thank you very much. Interesting idea for I think Danatara, as I understand, is doing something similar, with a big focus on human capital and capability building. Tadashi, let me turn to you with a two-part question. JBIC announced some months ago a joint fund with Danatara, I think up to $1 billion, kind of having done something similar with India, I believe, a couple of years ago. What is the intent of that fund? From a JBIC, from a Japanese investor point of view? And the second part of that question is, obviously, we're in a slightly new world today with the multilateral economic system, and tariffs in the U.S. market is becoming an issue, and investors now have to factor that in. Is that something that Japanese investors are looking at and considering as they look at Indonesia as an investment destination? Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Japan has been a long-term leading investor to Indonesia for many years. And we actually engaged in a 1998 Asia financial crisis, Suharto time. And since that time, that Indonesia reforms it makes results already. But now, the because of the change in the world, a lot of kind of balancing, especially geopolitical tension between the US and China, and also that rapid growth of the economy in Indonesia, and a lot of the non-professional investors were invested to that capital market. That's one of the topics that now Indonesia face, is that the reform of a kind of the guidelines or guidance of investment to non-professional investors. Not only the institutional investor, in order to make this market reform, and also that the lower the capital cost. The invitation of the foreign investors and also institutional investor is necessary. So this is one thing. And then in this course, that Danantara will play a certain role. That's why we are now planning to make a joint investment fund with Danantara in between $500 million to $1 billion. But to me, this is a lot of the things to sort out, because now the role of Danantara is not 100% clear to me. That business model is that like a private equity fund, or that they invest into that capital market as a listed company. This is not clear yet. So that our role is, we are not hedge fund. JBIC is a development bank, and at the same time, we have the equity investment facility and a full bunch of the investment using a foreign reserve account. Japanese foreign reserve account outstanding is 1.3 trillion US. But JBIC is the only entity which allows legally to access foreign reserve account of the Ministry of Finance. Therefore, that we can make use of this fund without some of the problem of the capital market in Japan. So we are not necessarily that there is a fund from the capital market. We can use this foreign exchange account money. So that this is up to that more further discussion with Danantara. And I hope that we also show that some of the examples that we've already made previously with India and Russia. We had a joint investment fund with the Indian Sovereign Wealth Fund, NIIF. It's a $600 million. So we deploy half of them, and they deploy half of them. But we set up the targeted investment sector. In the case of India, this is a carbon neutrality. Therefore, in Indonesia, probably some of cover supply chain of critical minerals, and also that the healthcare, well-being, and also semiconductor chips. And the infrastructure, we're going to make the different paths through that our debt financing, or combination of equity investment and debt financing. We have the long-term track record of leading PPP in Indonesia. So that's why that's, for example, transmission line between the Surabaya and Java and Java to Kalimantan. We are doing that project. The partner is a PLN. PLN is under Danantara. So that we need to make clear that the governance of Danantara and the state-owned enterprise. And then that's a very important issue. And also that second question to you, Adam, on the tariff issue. JBIC has primary responsibility to deploy $550 billion US dollar to the United States as a result of tariff negotiation. But this is an unbelievable figure, not possible to deploy within a Trump term, within less than 4 years. But at least we're going to make the investment, very meaningful strategic investment to the United States, which is a chips industry, and also that power generation because AI data center require huge volume of the power. So we need to invest into that infrastructure, power generation, power transmission in the United States, but not necessarily limited to the United States. We can do the same thing in Indonesia, and it's our partner in Southeast Asia. So that's because $550 billion is less than half of 1.3 trillion US dollars. So that we have a deep-pocketed availability of the fund. And also, that's very key important. We need to make this project really happen for mutual beneficiary between Japan and Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tadashi-san. Hazem, let me now turn to you. You have over 30 years experience investing across the Middle East, Asia, Europe. You were previously co-CEO of InvestCore, the largest non-sovereign private equity firm in the Middle East. Let me also, if I may, ask you a two-part question. As you look at Indonesia as an investment destination across a number of countries that you're looking to put money into, give us your sense of where Indonesia stacks up in terms of both the investment opportunities, but also within, you know, frankly, the new world of geopolitics in which we live, in which countries have to think about geopolitics and investors have to think about geopolitics and those choices. So with those two factors in mind, tell us how you think about Indonesia.
Good. All right, well, thank you, Adam. First of all, good morning, everyone. And to the Indonesian Economic Summit, thank you so much for organizing this terrific event. Thank you for having us and inviting me here. And most importantly, to the super nice and friendly people of Indonesia, thank you for always making foreigners like myself very, very comfortable and happy to be here. And that is a very important part of why investors from international markets want to be here. It's a pleasant country, pleasant people. Let's not talk about the traffic, but it's a very, very, very pleasant place to be here. And that's why, as a representative of Gulf capital, a significant part of it, here's my perspective. First of all, to specifically talk about the geopolitics, rerouting of trade, which is what we are seeing, ultimately results in the rerouting of capital. This will happen, and Indonesia will be one of the beneficiaries of that. Many of you know that post-World War II, there is a large number of nations that formed this non-alignment, I think it's called the non-alignment members, that are not allied with the Soviet bloc or with the Western bloc. Both Indonesia and the GCC have been part of that non-alignment. And in fairness, that have played out well. If you look 50 years on, fast forward, or 70 years on, fast forward to today, Indonesia, as well as most nations in the GCC, are able to be friends with both China and the US. And also, let's not ignore it, Russia and the European bloc. That has fundamentally been a very important relationship for Gulf capital, but it's also a very, very important relationship for where Indonesia is standing. Now, Indonesia is blessed. My perspective as a foreign investor coming here, it's blessed. It's a 1.4 trillion economy, 280 million nice people, 17,000 islands now, and it's blessed with natural resources. Now, if you marry that together, first of all, I'll get to the population in a second, and that is very, very important as a representative of our custodian of Gulf capital. More and more, I think we should expect to see businesses looking to reroute a lot of those trade routes from North China to Southeast Asia. And it's very interesting to see that Indonesia rests first as one of the top priority countries for China to invest in, but it's also one of the top countries for the US to form bilateral relationships with. So as an investor in a nation that does have resources, talent, natural resources, and those relationships, being able to work with local players, be it private or public, into developing downstream industries around a lot of the manufacturing, particularly downstream, I personally think the days of just shipping raw material on a boat out of Indonesia needs to stop. And it's time for the downstream industry to be as well developed. I hope we will play a very important part in that, into financing and supporting infrastructure investments around the mining and minerals sector, which is very, very important. Second of all, if I can, I have three topics which I want to talk about, if you don't mind. Second of all, the world's most populous Muslim nation. Over 95% of Indonesia, it's 280 million, are Muslims. I get very excited because I see a market which doesn't exist in the Gulf. I think many of us forget that the local population of Bahrain or Qatar is less than 400,000. 400,000. How many insurance policies can you sell? How many leasing contracts or credit card bills? You can't. And that is why the development, the expansion of the Sharia-compliant financial services industry in Indonesia is one which we personally find very interesting. There are a handful of, for example, Sharia-compliant banks in Indonesia. I think there needs to be more, not necessarily on the banking sector, but also going into the fixed income, the annuity, student loans, mortgages, credit cards, leasing, sukuk issues. There's so much on the Sharia-compliant financial services industry that if there's one country in the world needs to take ownership, authority, and be the capital of that, it is Indonesia. And that is why that is a very, very important part of what we do, what I hope we will be doing at Blue 5 going forward. Finally, there is an incredible phenomena in Indonesia, and it's called Bali. Bali has came out of nowhere to be one of the most talked about and important destinations, a hospitality and entertainment destination in the world. And it genuinely ranks, take any ranking of type of anything relating to hospitality, Bali will always be on that top 10 list. 17,000 islands, Bali is one of them. There needs to be at least 10 other Balis with different themes, different concepts, different entertainment ethos and what have you, when it comes to hospitality, entertainment, experiences. And experiences doesn't have to be partying, doesn't have to be beaches. It could be anything from family time. It could be wellness. It could be peace of mind and the island where you go to just read a book. And I think to that extent, the development of the next generation of what is hospitality in Indonesia will be a key part. So Adam, to summarize your question, infrastructure investment around mining and rerouting of trade, Sharia-compliant financial industry, and third of all, hospitality entertainment far beyond where Indonesia got to today.
Hazem, thank you very much. Very good summary and a number of good points there. You've raised, and let me sort of take the conversation in the direction. You've raised the issue of scale and the importance of scale, both as an investment, but also in today's geopolitical world. Dr. Feisal, let me start with you. We had a conversation yesterday, and you made the remark that this last year has been or should have been a bit of a wake-up call for ASEAN. That this is a world where scale matters, and this is the time for ASEAN to do more to create scale across ASEAN in terms of a deeper economic integration and creating more of a single production market, a single consumer market, to allow ASEAN investors to take advantage of that scale. What do you think ought to be on the agenda for the chair year this year as an investor? What would you like to see that would enable you to invest in ASEAN as a region as opposed to an individual country?
Thanks, Adam. Yes, I think in one of the sessions yesterday, I mentioned the urgency and the importance of really looking at ASEAN. And this came about, I think we all saw that when we saw tariffs being introduced by the US in a unilateral way and reset trade, and therefore capital going forward. I think, for me at least, it really drove home the point of how urgent and important this matter is when I was in Davos. And why I say that is because we all know that with tariffs, trade will be rerouted, and we have to find alignments and connect with various countries. But I guess when it really hits to the ground, then that's when people wake up. And that happened in Davos when Greenland issue came up. And you can see the Europeans really, really worried about Greenland. And they said, this is the red line. This is not going to happen. This is the red line for them. And the experience there was that it was very clear that the Europeans were really woken up and they had to come together. And this is the thing, come together. ASEAN is very difficult for us to come together. Europe has had to go at it for decades, and still it's hard. But I could actually see that it's actually woken up. And I've been privileged to attend some private meetings, and I could see that. And I think that drove home the point where it was crystal clear when it comes to technology, there's really two nations that are leading the pack compared to this world, which is the US and China. And there's no one else. When it comes to trade, we're already negotiating bilateral trades, country by country. Now, we can't wait anymore. We have to really look at ASEAN as a group. So that was my takeaway, at least in terms of the urgency and the importance. Now, what we'd like to see here is historically, investments has been following trade. Whether, I mean, at least for Malaysia, the largest trading partner is China, you've got US, and there's been a lot of trade where it's inbound as well externally. And admittedly, in ASEAN, there has been very few. Now, some of the ways that we can actually approach ASEAN is looking at it in two matters. And this is something that we've adopted in Malaysia, at least in Khazanah's Malaysian investment strategy, which is what we've done is we've actually looked at key enablers for the economy. We've clustered connectivity, energy transition, and digital. These are the key enablers. And then the next is allow the private sector to strive. So if I take that so-called strategy and look at ASEAN, so what are the key enablers? And I think when you actually look at the key enablers, it's really looking at energy. It's really looking at finance or capital. Now, we already have projects in place when it comes to ASEAN powering industry across ASEAN, which is the Asian Power Grid, right? We already have that. Let's start there. Let's really prove that when we want to integrate within ASEAN, the governments can align policies to really cope with this. And when it comes to intra-ASEAN Power Grid, it's really a country by country. But you know what? We have one, which is in West Kalimantan, which is good, right? West Kalimantan, Malaysia and Vietnam, that's happening. Now, the other thing is capital. I think, Arsjad, when you visited KL a couple of years when Indonesia was chair of ASEAN, you quoted the QR pay, right, the payments. So I hope this will happen this year, right? But that's the other thing, where you actually have payment rails within ASEAN so it can actually connect. Just a few examples. ASEAN Power Grid, QR, and here's the thing. Once you have some of the key enablers, let the firms thrive across ASEAN. And the ASEAN business entity is one possible area where allow these companies to roam and do business across ASEAN seamlessly. So I think for us to gain confidence in trying to invest in other countries, rather than looking at bilateral Malaysia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and whatever, looking at ASEAN as a grouping, we have to see the earnestness and the seriousness of governments in ASEAN to make this work. Now, if we can actually show clear direction and movement in APG and whether it's a QR pay or whether it's in capital flows and talent flows, then I think you're going to have a flood of capital coming in. Capital will always find the best opportunities. We just have to show them that.
Thank you. Tadashi, let me sort of get a variant of that same question to you. In the discussion about sort of how ASEAN should, pilot sectors as they think about deepening economic integration, because it's a very difficult project to do all at once. A number of the sectors that Dr. Feisal just mentioned are on that list. Tech, we'll focus on semiconductors, energy generally, but green energy also, autos, fintech. From a JBIC point of view, and maybe within the confines of the fund that you're setting up with Donatara, which of those sectors do you see as the most promising for both as an investment opportunity on its own, but also in this broader goal of tying ASEAN together more tightly in an economic sense?
Thank you. Actually, through that many deep discussion with the Trump administrations, now we understand that their priority of using money from us to build up manufacturing sector in the United States. This is, I think that this is not likely because of inflation, the cost is going up, and also lack of workforce. Therefore, this is not so easy or very tough to do in the United States. Probably many senior officials of the Trump administration is now recognizing, therefore they have to be engaged with other like-minded countries. Indonesia, you have workforce, skilled labor, engineers, a young generation. So that, therefore, that we, Japan, to be a bridging between the US and ASEAN, in particular Indonesia, that we're going to make some of the manufacturing center, the foundry of chips here in Indonesia, using that Indonesian engineers, our technology and our fund, and jointly to cover a full supply chain of chip GPU industry and AI data center. So that's we're going to make some of mechanism to get some benefit from this to the United States as well. Not directly only to the United States is not a solution to me. Therefore, that we need to make some very strategic analysis and strategic engagement between Japan and the ASEAN countries, in particular Indonesia, and eventually it is good gets the good result for United States as well. U.S. may understand this because what they speak in public, it's kind of political show. This is not real their intention, I think. Because throughout my discussion with Susan Wiles, of the Chief of Staff of the White House, I had lunch with her. And then I tried to persuade her to incorporate not only that country by country tariff negotiation. This is not really a good thing. So that we have to make a more engagement, both strategic engagement. Otherwise, this is not the good for the United States, and you may lose against China, I said. Therefore, this is probably these now acknowledge of the understanding of this. That bring us back to that more strategic engagement with like-minded countries. We are the formula of Quad, that they have a tension between India and the United States in tariff. This is not good. Therefore, that's my thing, that the ASEAN, in particular Indonesia, can be also that part of the bridges between the United States and another part of Asia. So Danantara can play some role. I will guide jointly with Danantara to make some of a mechanism to get these done. That's my agenda.
Thank you very much. Arsjad, let me again sort of get a slightly different variant of that question to you. You are, well, you invest in a number of sectors, but two of your priorities at the moment are energy transition and healthcare. Like any other investor, you're looking to invest more. What would you like to see from policy change, both again at sort of the Indonesia level, but also at an ASEAN level that would open up new opportunities in those two industries in particular?
Maybe let me just pick one sector, energy transition, as an example, because we were talking about ASEAN connectivity and so forth. So I have a new challenge in my life. So I founded a new PE called Sriwijaya Capital. And we have four sectors. We are focusing in Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia. It is energy transition. It is consumers, health, and business services. These are the four. So we believe that energy transition is a must. That is something, there's a lot of investment that's very, very needed here. We invested in a company with this entrepreneur, as an example. He, 34 years old, graduated out of Germany, now very focused in his business. The name of the company called Cessna. Now he has about, in his portfolio, almost more than 200 megawatt of solar. So what we're saying, okay, one thing is about that, but how to create a platform, a renewable platform, as an example. This is where the ASEAN play is, because I mean, the ASEAN power grid has been in discussion for 40 years, I think. But this time, I believe it will happen because of the momentum, because of the necessity that now the source and the supply and demands are far off. So we need connectivity. Yes, it seems very small now between Sarawak and West Kalimantan. But it's a beginning. Why we invite Premier of Sarawak to actually attend? Because to see that, they're preparing themselves for the hydros. But Indonesia also have hydros. Borneo, as a whole island, has a huge, big hydro potentials, right? Now, how to bring that out, right, to us in Indonesia, to Singapore, to Malaysia, to all over. So this is a necessity. And when we talk about energy itself, and we talk about AI, we talk about technology innovation, I think just now we all say it takes a lot of energy. Even in the US, is a deficit of energy. And we can see in this part of the world, as we are building more microchips and so forth, energy becoming more important. So I do believe, for example, this is a sector that's still very young, that we need to work more on it. And I'm very happy, for example, Japan with its Asia Zero Emission community, or ASEC, is also supporting this. So now it's this, right? There is the capital, people who wants to invest, like PE, like sovereign wealth fund and so forth. There is, like Japan, ready to actually give even financing for that. Now, how do we align ourselves? And now I do believe that we should push more about this. And I look at it that it's not just depending on the government, but I think the private sector itself, we have to also work. Let's talk. And when we started the QR code, as an example, QR payment code, it was conversation between the private sectors. Of course, then we asked the government to push to help that. And that's happened. So I think this is where the roles of us, as private sectors, to play a greater role in influencing our governments in the whole of ASEAN to push for this. One example, energy, the power grid, energy transition. That's how I see it.
Great, thank you very much. Hazem, let me turn the conversation back to Danantara for a second, or sovereign wealth funds. You obviously work in a region where there's some very large sovereign wealth funds. As you look at, we're going to look more broadly at ASEAN if you like, but in Indonesia, we have a smaller fund, INA, and we have a much larger, more recent one, Danantara. As a private equity investor, tell us how you think about that in both, opportunity, obviously. Are there any downsides to that? How do you think it's the right way for overseas private equity players to interact with sovereign wealth funds so that we can balance both the commercial returns and the national development demands that are put on the sovereign wealth fund?
All right. So Danantara, first, congratulations on that setup. I hope there's some Danantara members here. From what I hear or I understand, big picture, it's around $10 billion of liquid, but more importantly, around up to $1 trillion of assets that are contributed to Danantara. Fantastic start, because you have one nucleus, one decision-making body that oversees important parts of the industry. From my humble view, this is the time for Danantara to start to look at bringing partners. It doesn't have to be foreign investors. It could be local private sector companies. It could be international. That $1 trillion of assets, there's a good path to make it worth 2 or 3 trillion over the next 10 years. But that will involve foreign capital. That will involve just let go. Just let go. Sell a business. Let a foreign investor take it. Let best-in-class operators around the world own those businesses, and good luck for them, because if they are successful, they will make that 1.4 trillion GDP of Indonesia very successful. They will make 280 million people hopefully have better jobs, bigger jobs, and make the country fundamentally more successful. So how Danantara uses that $1 trillion worth of assets as a catalyst to kickstart phase 2 of the economy will be a very, very important part. And foreign investors are there, capital is there, know-how is there, there is the goodwill, there is the will, there is the interest. The very first thing I said was Indonesia has 280 million nice people, and that is fundamentally the most important part of any relationship. And that's why take advantage of it and open that $1 trillion worth of assets to foreign investors. Let them come in, participate, build with you, and create value together.
Thank you very much. We're running a little short of time, but let's try to squeeze in one or two more if we can. Let me, Dr. Feisal, let me turn to you and kind of stick with the Danantara question or the sovereign wealth fund question more broadly. It's a challenging job. You have to both catalyze foreign investments, which means you've got to keep an eye on commercial returns and competitive commercial returns at that. You also have your own national development goals. As you say, you're following the government's policies and its industrial policies. And so you also need to find, in addition, a balance between domestic and international investment. So that's already that's not the full list, but already it's a complicated list. How do you think about that? What what lessons have you learned that might be useful as for a Donatara that's just getting going?
Thank you. It is complicated, I have to say. It's very complicated, and I can share with you the Malaysian experience. And I think each sovereign wealth fund would actually have a different mandate depending on their stakeholders, in other words, their country's requirements. For Malaysia, I think the requirement when we were first set up back in 1993 was we were an investment house. We held investments for commercial returns. But even then, we had a dual mandate for developing the country, right? Now, first of all, you have to have that clarity. I think when you have so many different mandates and different priorities, internally, externally, people get confused. So there's one thing, is basically finding a purpose which everybody can understand. And that's why we coined it under Advancing Malaysia. Because you actually make money or advance the country. When you do it developmental, you're still advancing the country. The next thing that we did was we actually had to allocate, and this is like an investor, like an asset manager. We created funds where you have funds which was purely for commercial return, and at the same time, you have a fund where we call it patient capital, where we do get a return, but it's for a longer gestation period. And from a risk management perspective, because remember, we are risk managers, we have to do that because in order to manage our asset and liabilities. And you have to be very disciplined about that. And in not just being disciplined, but telling your stakeholders that these are our limits and this is what we can do. Now, when it comes to developmental, it doesn't mean that you cannot get a commercial return while developing the country. So what we did was 60% of our assets are domestic and 40% is international. And for the domestic investments, we actually clustered our investments to ensure that it's clear that we have an impact to the country. So we have aviation connectivity. We put in our airlines, our airports, our tourism assets. So while we do that, it's clear that it has an impact to the country. Energy transition, our utility company, we have a new platform, Lestra, which is focusing on decarbonizing industrial parks. That is also another platform. But all these platforms that we're doing is for commercial returns, right? And at the same time, we also have another fund, a newly fund, Dana Impact 1.5 billion, which I mentioned, and that is to spur or catalyze the economy. So when you actually think about this, our domestic investments become more focused for impact. Returns, we manage it through our funds. Internationally, it's about returns, but building that network of partnerships, building that insights to what's leading edge in technology and bringing it back to the country when it comes to spurring development. So it is not an easy task, but it's really executing and trying to get it done.
Thanks very much. Arsjad, we have, I think, time for one more question. As our co-host, I'm going to begin and end with you, and I've got one more question. Maybe ask you to peer a little bit further into the future for where you see the investment opportunities for Indonesia. Indonesia's had a very busy year on the trade agreement front. We've had a trade agreement with Australia. We're about to sign a SEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, with the EU. We're about to come to an agreement on reciprocal trade with the U.S. Not been the easiest process, but there will be reforms embedded in that. And Indonesia is attempting to fast-track an OECD accession process. So as you look at all those sort of forces at work, if I may call them that, what do you, like with your investor hat on and as your COD and IBC hat on, as you're looking from a business community, where do you see that throwing up opportunities? Where do you see those? Where do you see those new opportunities coming from? From the commitments of the market opening and the policy reforms that are embedded in these trade agreements.
Yeah, I mean, we've signed a lot of CEPAs, as you mentioned, and I just want to pick another example is actually this time around between us and Middle East. That's one example, right? One of the things that we push, for example, is now halal products, right? That we see that we have to connect Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia, with the Middle East. And we see there's a lot of opportunity, not only inbound, now it's thinking about how Indonesia can export, actually, goods that is halal to the other side of the world, for example, the Middle East. And we see that this linkage between these two supply chains is something that is an opportunities. And we see also now, as Hazem is here from the Middle East, and also yesterday we see the Saudi Chambers chair was here, is to see this connectivity. And more than that is the connectivity from Indonesia to the rest of the so-called Islamic countries. This is where also the launch of the B57 Plus, of this 57, because it's a new access of market. Because what Indonesia wants to see and offering to investors now, we have the resources, whether it's human and natural resources. You name it, all the minerals that we have. I mean, Hazem was mentioning that. Now, how do we make, and then with our positioning of ourselves, of our president, of our policies, neutral, non-block, I think with our location, there's tremendous thing we can do. And with all these CEPA that have been signed, particularly we talk about, I'm just talking about Indonesia, but ASEAN as one, this is a hub that can actually, you build manufacturers, anything. For example, just what Maeda-san mentioned about the chips. How can, the US maybe is the end customers. With Japan technology, what the resource of Indonesia here in building semiconductors, an example. I mean, Malaysia is more advanced than Indonesia in that. But there's still opportunities of the semiconductors. So with the resources that we have, think about us as, we have these resources, but we want to create value added. So we have, all the bauxite, we have nickels, we have so many things that you can actually create downstreaming, create value added. That's a lot of opportunities. Consumers, 280 million people, back to that again. I know it looks simple, but it is there. Now, this is where Indonesia is trying to create to be a hub. Not only Indonesia, but ASEAN. I keep saying ASEAN because I do believe in ASEAN. And the integration of ASEAN, if we keep all the power of all the countries in ASEAN together, we are very strong. We have 630 million people. So let's not think beyond even ASEAN. ASEAN really 630 million. So the opportunities of investment is great. But, back to the first question, there's a lot of investors asking. But I think you should give us the time. I think, let me borrow the Minister of Finance mentioned yesterday. Please give us a year at least. Use one more year to see how the growth of Indonesia. But again, this is where the certainty is very important. And that's why we keep saying about this certainty, talking about capability, and then of course capital will come. And this is where a lot of the question of how, when asked in the very beginning of when I make my remarks, and coordinate Mr. Erlangga say, please give me those answers after this conversation. So what it is, the government is waiting for inputs. So I think a positive side of things. So let's, we have these issues and we need to have these challenges, but certainty, this is something I think everybody in the room are asking. And this is, I think, the government is trying to answer this. But we need to push, because there's a lot of things on their plates, but at the same time, just recent situation, just want to repeat with the MSCI situation, how the government reacts towards this and how they want to make sure that transparency, and the extension of Indonesia towards OECD is another example of this transparency. So let's work together, and please do not, think of Indonesia still as the nation of investment, not only Indonesia, but the whole of ASEAN as one. This is a great place to invest. So I know I'm selling, but at the same time, I think, as mentioned yesterday by the ministers, the economic growth here will go. We do believe in that, and please be part of it, because we need the C, the capital. We'll give you the certainty, we need the capital, and the capacity. The government is also working on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A great note to end on. I feel we could go on for quite some time on that theme, but unfortunately, our time for this panel is up, and I'd ask the room to join me in a round of applause thanking our panelists today.
Thank you very much to our moderator and to our esteemed panelists, and we may request for you to please stay on stage. Please give a round of applause once again, ladies and gentlemen. And next, we will present a token of appreciation presented by the Indonesian Business Council. Therefore, we'd like to invite onto the stage to present the token of appreciation the Managing Director of Ciputra World, Bapak Harun Hayadi, to please come up onto the stage. Yes, Bapak Harun, you may present the award to our esteemed speakers and of course to our moderator. And now, may we take a group photo to commemorate this moment together?